Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX. Ukrainian President Zelensky has raised concerns about the US peace plan with Russia, stating that he has no meetings arranged with the Russians that he knows of and claimed Russia might launch an offensive against NATO. According to him, Russia may attack a NATO country next year in the absence of concrete security guarantees. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Zelensky claimed President Vladimir Putin of Russia may set his eyes on Poland or the Baltics next. Zelensky then stressed they need to have security guarantees from Russia, saying that Kyiv was willing to adjust its position on NATO membership. Zelensky also reported a Russian drone attack on the Chernobyl reactor, causing a fire but not radiation increase. US Vice President JD Vance emphasised the need for a negotiated settlement and a stronger NATO, aligning with Trump's views on the issue. However, Ukraine announced no plans for talks with Russia at the Munich Security Conference. Trump sparked debate by suggesting Russia's G8 expulsion in 2014 contributed to the invasion, advocating for its return to the G7. Joining us to discuss today's topic, we have Professor Alexei Haran, who's a Professor of Comparative Politics at the University of Kyiv. We also have Dr. Sergei Dvoryanov, a Director of Communication of the BCMF BRICS Culture Media Forum. We have Adrian Calamel, a terrorism scholar and fellow at Arabian Peninsula Institute. We have John Rosamondo, the President of the Viking Research Associates and a geopolitical analyst, also joining us from America. First off, I would like to come to you, please, Sergei, if that's possible. I want to look at the sort of contradiction that we've had between what Donald Trump said after his meeting with Vladimir Putin, saying that meetings will take place also with Ukraine in attendance. It seems that Zelensky has no idea of these alleged plans.
Good evening. Thank you for your question. I want just to remind that over past 25 years, our president has dealt with several American presidents. And never in the history of our relationship with America, we have such kind of very ridiculous relationship like with the previous administration of Joe Biden. Joe Biden, even he called once in his interview our president a killer. This word is completely not acceptable on the government level. It's not because of his emotional conditions. It's because of his completely ridiculous behavior. But right now, thanks God, we have such kind of a partner and a very smart and soft-heart president like Donald Trump. And of course, we have the history with the relationship with him. It's not a contradiction. I think regarding our dialogue of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, everything very predictable because it's based on the personal level of trust. Even today, I again did some research about previous meeting with Donald Trump 2018. It was in Helsinki. And it was a new page of our history of our relationships. And Vladimir Putin told that trust is not a condition regarding some relationship between America and Russia. We cannot put our full trust. But when our president speaks this statement, Donald Trump looked to him and he smiled. We can see that on the level of the people and heart-to-heart diplomacy, we have such a very responsible, thanks God, leader like Donald Trump. That's why, of course, he already calls this war bloody mess. And we can predict, even you can see that a lot of times in your show, I again and again repeat that Mr. Zelensky should be re-elected. And right now we can see that my words was repeated by Donald Trump. It means that our thoughts, our actions matter, right? And right now, I am again want to remind that we should start develop new vision. Freedom, responsibility is the position of interdependence. We depend on each other. And of course, Mr. Zelensky will be soon removed from this position. We expect a new responsible president of Ukraine. And I cannot see any contradiction. Everything going on right way in the hands of God.
I would like to build on that and come to you, Professor Harron. Of course, there's stuff to unpack there from what Sergei said to us. But looking at this alliance that seems to, or apparent alliance that seems to be coming together between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, do you think Zelensky feels on the outside of this and feels outside of these talks? We know, of course, he's mentioned that Ukraine must be at the table when these conversations happen. So what is the feeling in Ukraine?
Well, yes, Trump started direct telephone call to Putin. He made it. And there was some disturbance in Ukraine that the great powers, well, Russia is not great power, but still, it has possibility to nuclear blackmail the world, so that they may agree at the expense of others. However, very quickly, we heard another statements from Trump administration and also from Trump itself, that Ukraine is taken into account. Trump called Zelensky immediately after talks with Putin. And Trump also said that, Trump personally said that there would be trilateral negotiations with participation of Ukraine. This is very important. So the statements which were made before, they were corrected not only by Trump, but also by Vice President Vance, by Minister of Defense, and so on and so forth. Well, again, we need to understand, we understand that Trump would like to stop this war. I'm sure it's a sincere belief. The question is how, because it's very difficult to deal with a crocodile, and Putin is a crocodile. It's very difficult to negotiate with crocodiles. So we'll see what will happen, because Trump doesn't want to look weak. And if he make concessions to Putin, he'll be considered as a weak president. That would be not good, not only for the United States, not only in Europe, but also for other countries in the world. Because aggressor could do in this case whatever aggressor wants. My final remark on elections, look, Trump never said that he is going to oust Zelensky. This is not true, simply not true. And if we are talking about this discussion on elections, the arguments which we hear from Mr. Dvoryanov is ridiculous. Well, Zelensky is totally legitimate president who was elected in a democratic way. Russia is dictatorship, which is not to teach us, in position to teach others democracy. And the only thing why we can't conduct elections right now is because of the war which was started by Russia. But Russia is so cynical. You know, they started the war, it's not possible to conduct elections, and then they blame the victim of aggression, that there are no elections. This is so cynical.
Dr. Dvoryanov, I'd like to come back to you quickly before we move on, looking specifically at Zelensky's statement, saying that he predicts that Russia might go to war with NATO as early as next year. Is that a sentiment and statement that you believe and agree in?
First of all, I want to start with an explanation of the very bad shape and the dangerous frame of Mr. and his situation right now. As you know, America already started official investigation of Ukraine. You know this very well, that we have some official reports that part of these weapons
Adrian Calamel, it seems that we need to get our line sorted there with Dr. Dvoryanov. So I'd like to pose that question to you from a non-involved party directly in the fighting in terms of course, your nationality and allegiances. Do you think that Zelensky's statement regarding a Russian war with NATO is provocative, or do you think he's being realistic in what he's saying?
That's interesting. I think a lot will depend. I don't want to say this is a probe by Russia, but let's say everybody's watching. Putin's watching what type of deal is going to be made out of this. Xi of China is watching. So the Islamic Republic is also watching. The adversaries are watching what type of deal is possibly being made here. So this cannot be a signal to the rest of the world or to pariah nations that feel as though it's justified to break sovereignty and start a war. You know what, you can do that, you can make that step. It's going to be costly for you, but at the end of the day, it could work out for you. There needs to be a firm stance here. Zelensky saying NATO membership, that's the one thing that obviously wrangles Putin, but it's a defensive alliance, and again, I think it's more positioning on Zelensky's part to say, had we been a part of NATO, this probably wouldn't have happened in the first place, which is, I think, many people's belief is that Article 5 would have been triggered, and they would have seen a more robust response from all NATO members. So, yeah.
I want to build, John Rossimondo, thank you very much for waiting. I want to build on the NATO membership. We've seen from the United Kingdom today, and specifically Sir Keir Starmer, their Prime Minister, saying that Ukraine is on a path to joining NATO and also imposing new sanctions on Russia. Do you think it is a matter of time before Ukraine become part of NATO? And is that potentially what Zelensky is talking about? If Ukraine becomes a member nation, then by the virtue of that, Russia will, of course, be at war with NATO.
Well, let's put it this way. President Trump has said explicitly through his conversation with Vladimir Putin that as far as he's concerned, NATO membership for Ukraine is off the table. Let's not forget that it takes the assent of every single NATO member to add a new member. I mean, look at what happened with Turkey and Sweden and Finland in their accessions. So as long as Trump is president, it's off the table. And I think that Zelensky is engaging in fear-mongering by talking about Putin attacking Poland or attacking the Baltics. I've seen no evidence that Putin has any plans to doing so. And besides, if he were, it would be suicidal because the Russians have shown that they can't fight a real war against a poorly trained and equipped Ukrainian force, let alone well-equipped and well-trained NATO force.
Adrian Calamel, coming back to you, Vice President JD Vance, of course, is in Europe at the moment for the Munich Security Conference. He's made some interesting statements today looking at both sides. One point that I want to bring up to you and debate with you is his comments regarding Russia. Now he's threatened sanctions, and he's also potentially threatened military action if Russia does not work towards a deal. It seems that almost the message from President and Vice President could be slightly different. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that's Trump's approach to foreign policy. There's a good cop, bad cop approach, and with any foreign policy approach, especially with the United States' strength of soft power as well as hard power, you got to merge the two, and you have to leave every option on the table. This tells Putin that this stops here, and if you want to escalate or don't, or push things in a certain direction, we're not averse to using military force, whereas a previous administration shied away from this, and that goes back to why Putin ended up having problems with Obama and Biden, is because he was invading countries during that time and ceding parts of Georgia, taking Crimea, taking Ukraine, parts of Ukraine. So he had a problem, but when he was against a strong administration, which had a strong forward-leaning foreign policy, you didn't see Putin invading countries. The Bush administration, both of those, and then the Trump administration as well.
Professor Harron, I would like to come to you and look specifically at the strikes that have happened at the Chernobyl site. Of course, a site of devastation for many, many people, but one that is now protected with a shield which stops the radiation. But Zelensky has said that an attack on this site shows that Russia isn't ready to finish the war. Is that something you agree with?
Is ready to finish the war? No. Yes?
Yes, so in terms of, Zelensky says Russia isn't ready to enter peace negotiations because of attacks like the one that's happened on Chernobyl. So I want to get your understanding around specifically what that means.
It's one more example that Russia actually is continuing to use force against Ukraine, including the danger of nuclear blast in Ukraine. That's what happened in Chernobyl, you know. So there are no guarantees Russia will use this nuclear blackmail. Look, in Zaporizhzhia, this is the first case in the history of mankind when nuclear power plant is occupied by foreign military. And you know that Russians are now controlling Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the largest in Europe. Question, what for? Is it for military purpose? No. So this is just, another example of blackmailing the world, not only Ukraine. And regarding NATO, okay, I will not talk about Ukraine. But tell me please, why do you think that immediately after Russian attack against Ukraine, Sweden and Finland, which were neutral for decades, decided to join NATO? The answer is because they felt insecure, because they were really afraid of what Russia can do. Full stop.
John Rossamondo, I mentioned earlier that, of course, JD Vance in Europe has made some comments. Some of those comments have been slamming Europe, and Europe, of course, will be a vital ally to Zelensky as this war continues. What part do you think that Western European nations can play in also getting involved in these talks, something which Zelensky has alluded to multiple times?
Well, let's look at the state of the European military. So the British military is in shambles and can barely support in a sustained operation. The German military is in a worse shape than it was at the time of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. There's no political consensus among the Europeans about what to do. I mean, it's precisely the European reliance on America as their guarantee for their economic prosperity while neglecting their defense that gave Vladimir Putin the idea that he could invade Ukraine. You know, if the Europeans had not pawned away their independence on cheap Russian gas, this might not have happened. But I think the Europeans need to wake up, start putting their emphasis on rebuilding their militaries, rebuilding their industrial bases, because the United States is a global power. We have to concern ourselves with China and East Asia. We have to concern ourselves with the Middle East. And right now, Europe is a periphery for us.
Adrian Calamel, I want to look at Trump's comments specifically regarding the G7, which formerly was the G8 before Russia's annexation of Ukraine. What do you think Trump is trying to gain out of this sort of comment?
Again, it's Trump throwing words out there that will possibly, they're negotiating points that he's putting out there. And Trump, the way he negotiates, you have to remember he's very transactional. And the way he listens to people, but it's not an echo chamber. He takes in a lot of different views and differing views. So Trump will throw different, he'll throw things out there to try and move the ball forward, see what the reception is, see if anybody's receptive. Personally, I think tying that back to the G7 and saying welcoming the Russians back into the economic forum is a wrong decision. But if that's one thing that there's a negotiating point on, I think he's trying to find places where he can negotiate and not give up and say Ukraine, come out. Hopefully, Ukraine comes out as the winner of any type of deal. And obviously entry into the world economic, international community in that sense signals that to to Putin. That's a win for him, although I'm not sure it's a great idea.
And looking at any deal that is done, Professor Harron, Zelensky has said that potentially 110,000 troops will be needed in Ukraine if the peace deal is completed. Where do these troops come from?
Where this figure comes from?
Where will these troops come from that Zelensky is calling for? Is he looking for support from the US? Is he looking at support from the EU? Where do you think he's looking for that help?
Well, the idea is to have real peacekeepers in Ukraine, because we hear that China may provide peacekeepers, but we understand what roles they play. China's peacekeepers will be on the side of Russia, definitely. So we need Western partners, or those partners whom we can trust. So, and this is a problem actually, because it's a large number of peacekeepers. The country is large, the front line is huge, so it would be difficult, to organize such a number of soldiers to play their role. But perhaps it would be inevitable. We don't know we need some guarantee. If it's not NATO right now, what are the guarantees that Russia will not attack us again? So we really need security guarantees. By the way, I may quote our former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Kuleba, and he said that his argument, look, these peacekeepers is so costly. It's much easier now to supply necessary weapons to Ukraine for the defense of Ukraine, and Ukrainians will use it themselves, than to have 100,000 of peacekeepers on the ground.
Yes, and
so
looking,
I hope that, yeah.
I want to look and stay with the sort of topic of foreign troops. There are reports that potentially 3,000 North Korean soldiers could be sent to the front lines in the Russian Kursk region. John Rossomando, how do you think that will sit with Donald Trump if Putin, who is having these discussions with Trump, is insistent on using North Korean forces? Could that be a sticky point for Trump to try and come to terms with and get over in terms of course, America's geopolitical alliances?
Well, I think that President Trump might use his card with Kim Jong-un, who he developed a relationship with in the first term, to try to lean on him to stand down on providing troops. Plus, also, I think that President Trump is looking at a bigger picture, along with maybe increasing the amount of weapons that we might give the Ukrainians if Putin doesn't want to come to a deal. So I think that President Trump will keep all options open, and unlike the prior administration, he will not be myopic in the strategy he takes.
Adrian Calamel, to bring this insightful discussion to a close, I want to bring it back to the peace deal, something which, although it seems closer, is still far away for some. What do you think is needed just to finally get that over the line and get everyone in a room?
That's a really difficult question. At the end of the day, we're all hopeful. I think that that it's unrealistic to believe that Russia's going to give up some of the areas that they took back, over the last decade. But during this last offensive, during this last invasion, there needs to be some type of reparations payment. Now, to get people across the table from each other, it seems like there's some sticking points. NATO membership is off the table if you want to get Putin there. There's questions whether Zelensky's been invited. I hope Trump doesn't take a Doha approach where he invites the Taliban, but doesn't bring anybody from the Afghan government. So what we need is a deal that because as I said before, Xi Jinping is watching this. China is watching this. They're watching what Putin can get out of this deal. Is he going to come out of this as a winner, or is he going to be punitive to the measure that he needs to pay for the cost of some of these for the war? Maybe NATO membership is off this, but he's going to have to cede territory that he's taken air territory that's been recently contested, and he's got to pull back to a certain point, and he cannot invade again. It's delicate. I don't know how you get both groups to the table. Trump is great at working outside the box. I hate that expression, but you know, it's all about the art of the transaction, and he's great at thinking about different ways of resolving very sticky issues. So we'll have to see what comes out of it.
Adrian, thank you for your time. Also, thank you to John, Professor Harron and Dr. Dvoryanov. Of course, we will bring you all of the latest as this ever-evolving situation continues, both from Russia, Ukraine and the world.